Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So you just received a workflow JSON file from a developer, or you downloaded one from the n8n community, and you're wondering, now what? How do I actually get this thing working in my n8n account? Today I'm going to walk you through the complete process of importing and setting up an n8n workflow from a customer's perspective. No technical background required, just follow along and you'll have your automation running in the next 15 minutes. Let's get started. First, let's understand what you're working with. The JSON file contains all the instructions for your automation. You can think of it as a blueprint. As you can see, this is an example of a JSON file exported from one of my workflows, and it contains key value pairs. This is the key, this is the value, and altogether they make up a pair. And throughout the file, you have several key value pairs. The great news is you don't need to understand all of these code yourself, because n8n will handle all of that for you. You just need to know how to import and configure it for your specific account and services. Most developers will give you context about what the workflow does, what services it connects to, and what credentials you need. You should always check the README file or documentation that comes with the JSON. For example, this is a workflow that comes with some sort of instructions or README file in the form of notes. So for example, if you look into this note, you can see that there are multiple setups that are needed when you want to make this workflow functional. Alright, let's get the workflow imported. I'm starting here in my n8n dashboard. I can click on the Create Workflow button on the top right corner. Once created, I have an empty workflow, which means I have no nodes, no connections, no apps here. Then I can click on the three dots button here on the top right corner, and then I select the Import from File option because I want to import a workflow from a JSON file. I will select the calendar subagent.json file and click Open. And perfect! You can see the workflow has been imported successfully. n8n automatically gives name based on the JSON file, and you can rename this into something more meaningful for your business. For example, these nodes are named calendar agent, success, try again, and so on, but you can rename all of these nodes accordingly. You can see all the different nodes and how they connect together, but don't worry if it looks complex. We'll go through each piece that needs your attention. Now comes the important part, setting up your credentials. You notice some nodes have these red warning icons, which means they need to be connected to your actual account. Let's start with OpenAI chat model, which requires a connection to your OpenAI account. I can double click on it, and under the field of credential to connect with, then you click on this drop down field, and then you can click on create a new credential. With this, you need to have an OpenAI account, and then you need to have an API key that can be put in here. If you're not sure how to go through all of these things, then you can click on Open Docs. This is the documentation provided by n8n, which is very good for you to understand the step-by-step of how to set up the credentials for each service that is working with n8n. So in here, for example, you can go to OpenAI and create an account. Then you can open the API keys page and then create a new secret key, which is your API key, and then you copy that key and paste it back in here. And that means you will be connected to your OpenAI account. If I close this, and I have already connected to my OpenAI agent API key. So once you have resolved the credential for the node, then the red warning icon will be disappeared. Then these are the remaining nodes that still have credential missing. So I click on this. This is a Google Calendar node. Again, if you pay attention to the credential to connect with field, you can click on it, and there's a drop down. And again, you can click on create new credential. So this helps the n8n workflow to connect with your Google Calendar account. If you are not sure how to set this up, again, you can click on Open Docs here, which is provided by n8n, to show you how to connect to your Google service. And the service that we are going to use for this Google Calendar account is using OAuth 2. So OAuth 2 means Google will ask for your permission so that the n8n workflow can access your calendar in certain ways. And if you go through all this page, you can see how to set up the OAuth, which means you need to create a Google Cloud Console project, enable the API, configure the OAuth consent screen, and create the Google OAuth client credentials, and then paste all of the credentials back in the n8n workflow. If all of these steps are too complex for you, then I will have a video later on show you the step-by-step of how to set up the Google account in your n8n workflow. Stay tuned for that. In my case, I have already had my account connected, which is Google Calendar DKBN Worlds account, which is fine. So once the node has been connected to my account, as you can see, the red warning icon disappears. So I will do the same for the other nodes. I just double click on the node and then select the account that I want to connect to. So I need to resolve all the red warning icons for all of these nodes. Now we're done, we don't have any red warning icons anymore, we can test the workflow. Once you have set up the credentials for your workflow, then another area to pay attention to is the node parameters. For example, if you look into the Get Events node and look at the calendar section, you see this email value here, which means Google Calendar will fetch events from this email. However, if I click on this drop down, I don't see the email in the options, which means this is the placeholder value that was created by the developer. They might have connected their account with this email. However, I have connected my Google Calendar DKBN World account, which doesn't have anything to do with this email. So I have to change or update the value to my email, which is info@dkbn.world. So I will select this one. If I don't change that, I will go into the error of permissions when I execute a workflow. So this is a very common issue when you are connecting your n8n workflow with Google services. So please pay attention to that. With that in mind, I will double check all other Google Calendar nodes. So starting from this update event, and again you see there's a placeholder email there which I need to change. I will change to info@dkbn.world. Similarly, for delete event, I will update this one to info@dkbn.world. Get events, we have done that. Create event, we need to update that as well. And I'll do for this final node. Now we have resolved the node parameters for the workflow. Let's move on to the next step. Now for the moment of truth, we will execute this workflow to see if it works as intended. But you might have noticed that this workflow is a sub-workflow, which means it is not running on its own, and it should be executed by the main workflow. How do I know that? It is because of this trigger node. It says when executed by another workflow, which means this workflow should be called by a different workflow. It can be your main workflow or another sub-workflow. Right, so let's say I will double click on this node to see what we have in here. And apparently, this node accepts one field, which is called query. And the value of this key query is a string. And as you can see, there's a test value here, which says, check my calendar today. So I can run this workflow and it will run with this test value. And of course, you can update this test value with whatever you like. For example, I can say check my calendar in the next 3 days. And I'll click save, which means I have updated my test value for this workflow. Let's run the workflow to see if we have any events fetched for us. Great, it seems our workflow has been executed successfully. The agent has correctly used the get events tool and it outputs something in this success node, which I can click on and see what we have. we can see the response of the agent is your calendar's home show working from home office, scheduled for each of the next 3 days. There are no other events listed during this period, which is correct because I don't have any events scheduled in this calendar. So there shouldn't be any events, which means our workflow has been executed successfully and properly with our credentials, and the agent can access my calendar properly. And let's try with a different value to see if we can actually create an event. So I will change the test value here. So instead of check my calendar, I will say create an event named AI development for tomorrow at 10 a.m. So tomorrow should be the 13th of August, and if I check my calendar, I should see an event named AI development scheduled on the 13th of August at 10 a.m. I will execute the workflow again to see if we can have this done. Great, it seems the event has been created. I will double check by clicking on this success node. It says the event AI development has been scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. as a solo appointment in your calendar. This event is now confirmed, which is great, right? So now I will check my calendar to see if this event has actually been created. This is my calendar, and as you can see, it's under the name of DKBN World, and the email is info@dkbn.world. And if I look into the day, which is the 13th of August, there is an event at 10 a.m. on the 13th of August, which is great. So now I'll go back to my agent and ask it to check for the events or get the events for tomorrow to see if it can actually get the event properly. I will change the query here to check my calendar for tomorrow. And now execute the workflow again. As you can see, the agent has correctly accessed the Get Events tool, and it has produced something in the success node. Now we can see that it says I have an event named AI development scheduled from 10 to 11 a.m. for tomorrow, which is correct. So now this workflow, we know that it has worked successfully. It means that I have downloaded a workflow, I have set up the credentials correctly, and then I have made the workflow work in my n8n account. Before we wrap up, let me share some best practices that will save you headaches down the road when you import a workflow from somebody else or from any n8n community. First, when you import a workflow in the form of a JSON file, then the very first thing you need to do is to check the credentials. Ensure that you have the correct credentials connected to your account so that the workflows can work properly. Second, you need to check the node parameters as I've showed previously in all of these Google Calendar nodes. You need to correctly point to your email or your Google Drive, Google Sheet, and so on. Then, if you want to check if the workflow works as expected, you can use some other tools in n8n, for example, executions. When you click on executions, you can see there were 3 executions that took place with this workflow, and then you can click on the node in order to see what is the input for each node and what is the output for each node. And you can inspect that by going to logs. So for example, I'm inspecting the calendar agent here, and I can see the logs here, which means which input has been used for the OpenAI chat model and which tool has been called and what is the input for the tool. For example, in here I can see Get Events tool was called, and I can see the input produced by the agent and the output produced by the tool. So you can inspect the workflow using the logs, which is very, very useful for you to see if the errors happen and why the errors happen and how to fix, because occasionally the logs can produce some errors, but they also show how to fix the errors occasionally. So that brings me to the end of the video. If you like the video, please give me a like and a subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Thank you. Bye.